Steve, thank you for those very, very kind words about the Center for Food Safety. Yeah, we have offices in Washington, D.C., in San Francisco, Portland, Los Angeles, and Honolulu. We have about a dozen attorneys. We've got scientists. And you know, in these very difficult and dark times that we live in today, you know, there are some good things happening through what we do and our colleagues. I want to let you know that just recently, how many people here know about neonicotinoids? The pesticides that are killing our bees. People know about that, the neonics, yeah. Well, we just won a big law case that declared 59 of these, the worst of these neonics, to be illegally approved. So we're going to get those out of the environment and help save the bees. That just happened. They are now, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, they're now doing nanotechnology pesticides. Well, we just won a lawsuit that reversed the approval of the very first nanotechnology pesticide. Thank you. And we're fighting this, and we'll talk about this. I'll probably start off with this a little bit later, but we're litigating to halt the introduction of a genetically engineered salmon. This is a terrible product of genetic engineering. This salmon has horrible cranial malformations, but they're trying to grow it in Canada and here, and if it were to escape, it would destroy our native salmon species. And we just had a major victory there where the court said that we were entitled to all the information that the FDA has on this, and that I think once we get that information, we will stop that as well. And you know, we hear about Monsanto and Syngenta and Bayer and those chemical companies, biotech companies, and sometimes it seems like it's a juggernaut. I mean, juggernaut, how are you going to deal with these guys? Well, I just want you to know, over the last 10 years, we have stopped the approval of genetically engineered wheat, stopped the approval of genetically engineered potatoes, stopped the approval of genetically engineered BGH that goes into cows. We've halted altogether about 10. Imagine if all the wheat out there was genetically engineered. Imagine if you had all the rice out there that was genetically engineered. So you can beat these guys, and we beat them all the time, as do some of our colleagues. And so, you know, even though these are difficult times, we have to realize that we have the power. Ultimately, we will be victorious. We will win these battles. And I want to leave plenty of time at the end of this talk, because I know you probably have a lot of questions about GMOs. I've been working on GMOs since 1985. So I know only too much about the subjects, unfortunately. And yet I still sleep at night. How odd. But any questions you have there, you may be curious about what's going on with organic, beyond organic. You probably heard that I'm president of the board of Certified Humane. Is that a real deal? Is that something you can trust? What about food safety? What's going on with the Trump administration? How are they doing with biotechnology? How are they doing with organic? What effects is that going to have on our health? What about pesticides? What about EPA and Pruitt? So I'm happy to answer all those questions, but I'm going to take advantage of you guys. It is Sunday and around 11 o'clock, so this is usually the time when people hear sermons. So like it or not, I'm going to deliver a little bit. I think I grew up as a Catholic out in Jamaica, Queens, and so there's probably a frustrated priest in me somewhere, and somewhere between that and a stand-up comic. Since I just can't resist this, so I'm gonna lay it on you and then get into some of the other stuff that we want to talk about. So about 25 years ago, I was writing a book called The Human Body Shop that Steve mentioned, and as part of the research for that book, I heard that the United States Department of Agriculture in their Beltsville, Maryland laboratory, which is about 45 minutes outside of Washington, D.C., were genetically engineering pigs with human growth genes. The idea was to have human growth genes in every cell of those pigs to create giant pigs. The man who was doing it was a charming fellow named Dr. Vern Purcell, and he said he wanted to make a pig as big as a barn. I guess pork chops for everybody was the idea. But I was curious. I mean, I was writing a book about the genetic engineering of life and the patenting of life, and so I went out. I actually went out to Beltsville and made an appointment with Dr. Purcell because I wanted to see what his pigs looked like. What was this going to... And so I met, when I went out to Beltsville, Maryland, I met pig number 6707. It was his most successful pig. And he brought me into this pen where this pig was, and I immediately noted there were some anomalies with the pig. For one, the pig could not stand up. in order for me to photograph it for my book, I had to put it against a little plywood thing and kind of push it this way. Its musculature had overwhelmed its body. It was cross-eyed. And he told me that it was going to infertile. And so I said to him, what happened? And he said, well, Andy, imagine if you put elephant growth genes in an embryo, human embryo, and the musculature would overwhelm the human body. That's what's happened to this animal. And I said, well, this is terrible. This is a tragic, I mean, he's suffering. This is terrible. He said, Andy, the Wright brothers didn't get it, the first time either. Now, it took them a few. And, I put that in my book, but I thought about it for a while. And I realized that, and by the way, Dr. Vern Purcell retired about 5 years ago. He never did successfully create a genetically engineered pig, but he tried many, many times to unknown amounts of suffering for those animals. And he is now, as you can get online, you can check him out. He's in the USDA Hall of Fame. So what I realized was that there's behind a lot of what we were talking about at this conference and what you guys do, there is ideology at work. Yes, it's profit. Yes, it's part of our system, but there's also an ideology at work. And unless we get at the consciousness behind that ideology, here comes my sermon part. All the Center for Food Safety, all of our litigation, all the great work every one of you is doing out there is not going to do it. Because there's going to be too many genetically engineered plants out there. There's going to be too many pesticides out there, too many animal factories out there. What is behind this? What is behind this system that has us acquiesce to it, that has us be part of it? What is that? What is the consciousness that is creating the problems? Because if we only stop the bleeding, there's going to be too much wounding out there in the environment, ourselves, our health, our children's health, the health of the planet, the torture of these animals. What is the consciousness that creates this world that we're all fighting so hard to change? So I want to spend just a few minutes talking about that and talking what I'm happy to have your input into later. This is, obviously, this is an opportunity for me to get a bigger picture on what I do and hopefully on what you do, and we can dialogue on it. So, what I realized was that if you go to a church and they talk about evil, they're usually talking about what you might want to call hot evil, lust, sins, and these do terrible things. Anger, those sins of the heart, and I would call that hot evil. People are impassioned. This would be true with terrorists. But I'm suspecting that that's not the biggest problem that we have. I think one of the biggest problems we have is something I call cold evil. Dr. Purcell was not all heated and passionate. He didn't say, oh boy, do I want to torture this pig. Man, it feels good to torture this. No, not at all. He was very calm. He was very rational. He explained the science of how they're getting these human genes into each of the cells of the pig, an impressive technical feat, certainly. And if you think about cold evil, let's get beyond Purcell's experiment and let's look what happens to the 10 billion animals that we use every year in this country for food. 10 billion, right? And then we have something at McDonald's called the Happy Meal. That's the least happy meal. And not just because of how it affects our kids' health and our community's health, but because of what's going on there. I mean, just think about the forests that are cut down around the world for the beef culture. Think about the terror of the animals. Think of the destruction of the forests. Think of what that means for our planet, warming. Think about what's happening to those animals in the feedlots and the slaughterhouses, which shouldn't even be called houses, slaughter factories, because that's what they are. They're like the Detroit factories in reverse. That's the assembly line, that's the disassembly line. And we just last week, all right, the USDA said that they were not going to increase the allowable rate of birds going through the disassembly line in these slaughter factories to from 150 birds per minute to 175 birds being slaughtered per minute. So what's happening? How do we partake in this? Well, we're all sitting there with, Ronald McDonald. So one thing I can tell you is its distance, right? Most of us live in an urban environment. I'm a New York City kid, and we're a very great distance from where our food is made and where these products are made, right? At a very great distance. So in my lifetime, we've lost 10 million farmers, 5 million farms. 75% of all the creatures on the endangered species list are there because of farming or ranching. The highest suicide rate among any profession in America is farmers, by far, about 4 times per capita. By the way, dentists are way up there too. I guess you can only see so many teeth in a lifetime before you start. Yeah. And of course, police and psychologists in the top 10 too, so beware of that. Maybe a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Yeah, so we have massive suicide among farmers, and we know what this is doing to our health. It's doing to the health of our children, doing the increases in cancer, and we'll get into that with pesticides in just a minute. But I think there's also an ideology behind it. Anybody here remember the Jetsons? Jetsons? What did the Jetsons eat? Remember? Big vitamin pills. But they ate it with a knife and fork. You got to keep some traditions alive. And do you remember what they drank? This orange substance that we knew was Tang. And we liked Tang because Tang was a drink that who drank? Remember? The astronauts drank. That's right. That was going to be the future. So think about that for a second. Think about the future of food. The future of food was supposed to be, we're going to live in these weird sort of, no air, no natural air, nothing. We're going to eat, vitamin tablets with our knives and forks and drink Tang. That was going to be the future of food, right? So that gives you some idea of the distancing between us and our food system. And when I said fatal harvest, and you think about all the deaths because of nutrition, all the obesity, you think of the suicides of the farmers, you think of what's happening to the 10 billion farmers, you look that we're exhausting our topsoil at 13 times the rate we can replace it, that the Ogallala Aquifer right now is about 40% down, so we're about 1,000 years from filling that up. When I call it fatal harvest, our current system is not sustainable. And the word fatal was not rhetorical in that sense.